Okay, in 18.2, we have two types of special right triangles. The first one is if the two angles are the same, they're both going to be 45, because all three added together would be 180. So this is called a 45, 45, 90 right triangle. And it's kind of like a base angles theorem where the opposite sides are congruent. So that is true. In a 45, 45, 90, the two sides are the same. So if you label them A, B, and C, okay, the hypotenuse would be is C, but then how would we find it? Well, if you do A squared plus B squared equals C squared, then C squared would equal those two added together, and then you would square root. So it would be the square root of two of the same thing, okay? 2 of A squared or 2 of B squared, whatever it is, okay? Now, if you have the side, or sorry, well, let's just do an example. Okay, this will be easier. So we know that this side and this side would be the same. So this would have to be 8, okay? And so for y, you could just, nothing special to it. You could just say 8 squared plus 8 squared equals y squared. Or if you wanted to simplify that, you know that's 2 times, or you just do the number, you just calculate it out. 64 plus 64, so y squared is equal to 64 plus 64, which is, what, 128? And then you square root that. So what is the square root of 128? I don't think it's a nice, neat number, so we would have to simplify it. Well, we know that it's 64 times 2. We just did that. And the square root of 64 is 8, so 8 square root 2. Oh, look, it's the side times, or it's the side, the leg, times the square root of 2. So we could go back up here to hypotenuse and say that C equals, an easier way is to say one of those sides times the square root of 2. That's how I would remember it. Okay, so we kind of just derived that information. Let's see if that works over here. So if we have the hypotenuse, now we want a side. Well, x equals y, so we just need to find one of them. Well, if this, 19, is the C, and that equals one of the sides times the square root of 2, to get that side, we would have to divide by the square root of 2. So 19 divided by the square root of 2. So if this is what your answer looks like, we need to simplify that by rationalizing the denominator. So this is going to be 19 square root of 2 over 2. And if you need the actual decimal number, then just go back to here and take 19 and divide it by the square root of 2 and use the decimal, like if you needed to find an actual length. But if we're just using ratios, then you simplify them and rationalize the denominator if you need to, and there you go. All right, so the short way is that you take one of the sides times the square root of 2 to get the hypotenuse. If you have the hypotenuse, you divide by the square root of 2. Okay? So we could say to find the leg, you could take the hypotenuse divided by the square root of 2. Okay? All right. The next triangle, special right triangle, is a 30, 60, 90 right triangle. Okay? So 30, 60, 90. Now to begin with, the angle that's 60 is going to have the shortest side right next to it. Okay? This longer side will be next to the 30-degree angle, and the other side will always be the hypotenuse. Okay, so this we call the shorter leg. This one would be the longer leg, and the hypotenuse. There's kind of a quick way to find these sides. So the short leg is always half of the hypotenuse. Okay, so whatever the hypotenuse is, you divide it by 2, and you have the short leg. And the other way around is if you have the short leg and you times it by 2, you have the hypotenuse. So you could take 2 times the short leg for the hypotenuse. Okay, so we need the short leg for if you have the short leg, you can find the hypotenuse pretty easy. If you have the hypotenuse, you can find the short leg. Those two go together. The long leg needs the short leg. Okay, so the long leg is the short leg times the square root of 3. Okay, so if you have the long leg, then you would have to divide by the square root of 3 to get to the short leg, and then take that and times it by 2 to have the hypotenuse. Okay, so the short leg is half the hypotenuse, or you could say it's the long leg divided by the square root of 3, depending on what you start with. Okay, so remember those as we go here. So look at example 3. Here's your 60-degree angle. So this is the short. This would be the long. This would be the hypotenuse. Okay, so if we want to get to the short leg, because we have to get the short leg first before we can get the long leg. So the short leg is half the hypotenuse. So this would be 32. Or 30, sorry, half of 46, 23. Okay, so if that's 23, then 23 times the square root of 3 would be the long leg, because that's how we find the long leg, is the short leg times the square root of 3. So you just write 23 square root 3. Okay? Example 4, let's see, what do we have? We have, this is 30, this then is the long. This would be the short and the hypotenuse. So if we have the long leg, we have to get to the short leg. Well, we have to divide by the square root of 3. So the short leg would be 9 square root of 3 divided by the square root of 3. 9 long leg divided by the square root of 3. So those would reduce, so the short leg is just 9. Okay? And then to get to the hypotenuse, it's double the short leg. So this would be 18. Okay, so this one, here's your 60. So this is the short. This is your long. And this is the hypotenuse. So what do we have? We're starting with the long. So if we're starting with the long, we have to go long to short. We always get to get the short first, because we can't get the hypotenuse without the short. So the long leg divided by the square root of 3 is the short leg. So this is 20 divided by the square root of 3. So we need to simplify this. So we're going to times by the square root of 3. So we're going to have 20 square root 3 over 3. Now if the 20 and the 3 here reduced, then you reduce them. Like if this were 20 over 6, then you would, reduce them both by 2. So now I have the short leg, 20 square root of 3 over 3. If I times that by 2, 20 square root of 3 over 3 times 2, then it's just going to be 40 square root 3 over 3. And 40 over 3 does not reduce. So when you're timesing the fractions, it just times the top, times the bottom, there's your fraction. And remember the 2, the whole number only multiplies with the whole number out front. It doesn't multiply under the fraction, under the radical. That's only if you had another radical there that you would do that. Okay, so there's your 30, 60, 90 right triangles. The next page is your assignment. So you're doing similar questions just like these.